Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Financial Director webinar. My name is Alara Pascal, and I will be the moderator today. So in this webinar, we have quite a few topics to discuss. We'll be talking about capital allocation strategy, and we'll show you how to unlock cash hidden in your balance sheet and use it to fund strategic investments and, of course, increase value. So with rising inflation pressures, supply chain shocks, and a skills shortage to contend with, businesses looking to drive growth are now, of course, asking the very inevitable question of how. So to answer this important question, I'm joined today by four great guests. Firstly, I'd like to welcome David Brown, founder and CEO at Hi55. Belen Villasante, Global Digital Finance Transformation Partner at NTT Data, is also joined with us. David Costa, Global Head of Business Development and New Markets at NTT Data, also here. And finally, we have Alwyn Magnay, Senior Managing Director at FTI Consulting. Pleasure to have you all with us today. Thank you for being here. So just quickly before we get started, we will have a quick Q&A session at the end of this webinar. You will see a Q&A box on your screen. So throughout the discussion, please feel free to send in any questions and we will get to them at the end of our webinar. So without further ado, let's kick off today's session. So before we came live on this webinar, we were just kind of discussing the very prominent crisis that is happening in the world. David, you know a lot more about this than I do and how it's affecting businesses. So I would just like to hand this over to you to kind of give an overview and kick off the session.
Thank you, Lara, and also a big thank you to David and Belen from NTT Data, one of the largest IT companies in the world, and Alwyn from FTI Consulting, one of the leading restructuring and digital agencies in the world. And it was interesting when we set the agenda for today, which was set several weeks ago. Just in the last week, the world changed significantly with the situation in Ukraine. And that's put further pressure and thoughts into every leader of a business, because not only have we got inflation, not only have we got pandemic recovery, we've actually now got the fallout of what a war brings and what that means to human resources, because they will be stretched. So I'm really grateful for the audience joining us today, because I have never seen such circular challenges in a business ever than what we're faced with today.
Yeah. And talking about the crises that are happening today and just looking back at the global pandemic, of course, affected businesses, some better, some worse. But one thing has remained pretty consistent, I would say, throughout for all businesses, and that's just the pace of digital transformation, the need for updated technologies, and how businesses really build up their systems. So with the pandemic, I think from your perspective, David, what would you say has changed the most? What's been the biggest driving factors?
It's been fascinating for me. I mean, I think the greatest lesson that the pandemic has taught every business leader in the world is the need for working capital in a crisis, because I personally believe if it wasn't for government intervention, hundreds of millions of people would have lost their job, because payroll would have consumed every piece of working capital from the business, because no one expected a duration of this time and closures of countries. So suddenly you had basically a spotlight on the importance of funding payroll, which happens to be an area that Hi in particular is focused on. But it's also brought a huge amount of other challenges, because people have then went to work in virtual situations, and employees have then, come back to work. There's a whole question, why do you need to be back in the office? I've got the cost of coming into the office, the cost of lunch, and then you've got inflationary coming around the corner, where you've got rising costs, and employers sat really saying, well, what do you do? Do you do wage inflation? Do you do employee benefits? How do I now basically rethink in a very short time this new world that lies in front of me?
Absolutely. And Alwyn, how would you say the workforce of today has changed? What's the biggest difference?
Dramatically, right? So pre-pandemic, we were in what's called the new normal. People were grappling with, how do I transform my business digitally? How do I become more global? And how do I attract and retain what I call millennial talent? And then we hit pandemic and everybody had to work from home. And if you recall, one of the biggest fears people had was, oh dear, productivity is going to go down when people work from home. Well, that simply wasn't true. In my business, productivity actually went up. And suddenly, the whole notion of working from home became quite a viable strategy for some companies. And that really shifted, created a huge shift in perceptions, in mindsets of what companies can do. So before the pandemic, companies were thinking, should I expand my offices in the major cities? So I know the president of a large consulting organization who's based in 39 cities, and he's saying, I'm just going to downsize all of those offices, just create co-working spaces and meeting rooms for clients. So what's going to happen to commercial real estate under those circumstances? So I think of it in two dimensions, right? So we win the war for talent by having the right mindset, by having the right mindset around our employees. Post-pandemic, I think we now need to shift that mindset into what I call hard set. And hard set is really about putting the employee in control, giving them a purpose for why they're here and why you're here. Ensuring they have flexibility in terms of being able to deliver the outcomes that you want, everything from the ability to choose where they work, the ability to bring devices, the ability to get paid when they want, right, would be flexibility. And then putting them in control. When I was in McKinsey's, we had a simple mantra that said, you join in as an analyst and you work really hard for 12 to 15 years and then you become a partner. But guess what? Most of the millennials are saying, I actually don't know whether that's a valuable proposition for me. I can commit maybe 2 years to you and then I'll see what happens. And I want to be able to morph and grow and evolve. And as a leader of a business, you need to be able to account for that hard set. So people have choice today. So being able to give them flexibility and control, I think, is extremely important.
And David Costa, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah, I would like to repeat, I'm a passionate of people, and we have been talking about, I don't want to call it war, no, it's a competition for the talent that came, before the pandemic with their exit. We have now inflation, we have a lot of pressure on the market, no? But for me, the main changes that affect the employer is that now the talent is aware of its relevance. Probably in the past, they felt they were working for someone. Now they are working with someone. So they choose the company they want to work with, okay? And the change of paradigm is that now remote work is the normality, okay? And 100% digital work is possible. No, this morning I was taking pictures. I'm by myself in the office. Now there are 5, 6 people, no? And this office used to be very, very alive, no? And this has tested all of ourselves. No? As a company, we need to transform that. I will come back later to that. But for me, the most important thing, and this is the human part, I think the priorities of people have changed. No, now life is more important than work in the balance, okay? And they are conscious, everybody, about well-being. Job security, at least in the market where we live, is not as important as before. Now, there is little commitment with the employer. Let me give you an example. We hired last year 12,000 people. Okay? And some of them had not been in the office. So tell me, how do you build the bond with your company that for us was one of our main strengths, no? So the employees now, this results on a higher mobility, they're money conscious, okay? We are discussing with David, Alwyn, and Belen this morning, no? Some of our employees are offered double the salary, but they have the same skills. And because there is a lack of talent. So in our business, fortunately, we have been able to evolve not only with remote work, but introducing automation-based, solution that will help to accelerate that. But most of the thing we are doing now is that some people, talent has become strategic for all the companies, no? But before it was like a HR role, no? And now all the company needs to get involved. And it starts from The moment you start attracting people, from the way, for me, it's not retention, it's how you engage with your employees. We come back later to that. And then how do you develop them? Because what they want to see is what is this career that Ali was mentioning too. I come back later if this is a topic that is interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Lara.
If I can build on what Alvin and David have mentioned, really, I think, spot on. Talking specifically about finance practitioners, right? That I think that our audience is in the finance area, CFOs and top leaders in the finance area. What we see talking to finance leadership, we see that all those pressures are in finance as well as in any other profession. But on top of that, what we see is that during the pandemic, finance professionals have been have been challenged to provide value at unprecedented speed. Companies who have stopped doing forecasting, the typical forecasting, 3 outlooks a year, to do a weekly forecast, because the volatility has been so high that people needed to provide vision and guideline to the business. And business has get used to that speed and to that type of service. In many cases, this has been done at the expense of the effort, of the personal effort of those professionals trying to cope with the need. So now there is an expectation of speed, value, flexibility. Meanwhile, not always the tools, the means, the methods are there. So I think that is one of the elements very particular to the finance professionals. And the second element is that they are expected not to be only excellent in the business as usual, in doing what they do well, right? Maximizing their finance background and skills, but also being able to transform, to be digital transformation levers in the company out of the information they have. So I think that those are two particular challenges that they are facing, and we see across every industry, to be honest, where from utilities to financial sector to more industrial companies. That's the great challenge CFOs are being posted today with the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great points there. The talent strategy, the war on talent, well, the shift, of course, in priorities have changed, and it's moved from organizations holding the power and saying, why should you work for me, to now employees saying, well, why should I work for you? And that has inevitably led to the Great Resignation, the requirement, the need for a more diverse workforce, a more inclusive and culture-driven workforce. So what can businesses do to kind of retain their workforce? Just touching upon all the points that were made. David Brown, love to listen to you.
You're on mute.
I'm on mute, sorry. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and probably not, my response is probably not what your audience actually wants to hear, because I had an interview last week on this very subject. But outside of wages going up, I think the employer's in a bit of a cul-de-sac here. We've got rising costs, rising inflation, and the workforce is currently feeling the pinch. And with the best will in the world and the most financial talented people around me, I really, don't see any other way than employers really consider the cost base of the human resource talent that they hold. But there's other tools that you can bring to bear to really retain that workforce around, as Alwyn rightly says, how do I pay you? How do you want to be paid? What suits your lifestyle? What benefits can I give you? How can I make your life better in the company? Because these are the questions we need to ask outside of just the blunt tool of saying, let's just give everybody a 15% pay increase. But the reality is finance and HR are going to have to align now and align properly, because otherwise there is, a real issue in the human talent side of the business.
And David Costa, would you want to add to that?
Yeah, I like this question, because this is our business. No? So basically, it's a great challenge, but I think it's the right time to not to be one of many. Now is when people realize if companies have this purpose and they are unique. No, is from being top of mind because I need you to be, I call it top of heart, because I feel this is the best company for you to work. So for me, there are like three main areas what we have to work on. No? It starts with the attraction. No? When you do the interviews, we all put our best face, okay, from all the aspects, and the employee is the same. No, so you have to make sure that whatever you offer them, they find it when they join the company, because basically it's going to be very difficult to differentiate yourself. Just if you just want to pay more, this is going to be like a spiraling, and it's going to be unsustainable. No? So we need to find a way to attract the talent. So basically, here we are working on as a global employer to have a brand that is related to values that people want to work with. No, and then to be consistent, we know that we are talking about be flexible. No, and it means work where it works. It means to offer different types of compensation packages that are adapted to the people who want to join the company. And probably here David Brown can later on mention about real-time payrolls and other tools that we are implementing also in the company. We are going to invest a lot, okay, and we are already doing that in training and reskilling, okay? And we are also clarifying how do we accelerate professional development. So in the past, probably there was emphasis, at least in our group, but now it's still more important because, this is something that has to come like a big package. No, it's like individual way of how to operate. And then for me, the most important, and I finish, is that there is a big difference between working for a leader than working for a boss. Okay, so and we focus a lot on that. People follow leaders, and then money starts to be not so relevant. Okay, and this is something we call it. We are evolving the type of leadership we want. So those leaders have to be involved in the recruitment process. In our case, every senior manager, every director, every partner is involved in those processes because they are the ones who are able to transmit those values and to convince people that we are a good company. So, and then all that is related, with diversity, equity, inclusion. Okay, everybody talks about it, but it's very difficult to demonstrate that you are this type of company. Not only because it's what is nice to say, is because you are. So, for me, this is an amazing, stage in our journey, because it has allowed us to evolve really quick to what the market needs. I think all of us, we are better professional than before. We appreciate better what is well-being ourselves. I'm not talking about employees, myself. I value more now what is the well-being than before. So I strongly encourage people to say, make sure that the people that work with you, 80% of their time, they have fun, and 20% is work. It's related, but yeah. So this is my point. Sorry. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just shifting the perspective a little bit, Alan, you mentioned a really good point about the shift for the CFOs and finance directors. So to focus on your point, what has shifted from businesses? How can business leaders now look to access their working capital, to unlock the cash, and with everything going on, this paradigm shift that we're experiencing? Belen, over to you if you want to answer this one.
Yeah. Sorry, I was having few seconds of valley in sound, but I'm back. So what we are saying, we are saying, well, we have talked, I think, a bit about human capital. When we talk about financial capital, what we have seen is that during the pandemic, one of the very most urgent areas to focus for CFOs were cash, liquidity, and ensure that they had the financial health to go on with operations. And it took like the very first 3 months. It was like very, very much focused on ensuring business continuity and that financially this could be managed. What we have moved into now is into really finding which are the best ways to allocate the capital, how to make sound decisions. In that, we have seen two things happening quite prominently or with greater focus than before. One is massive use of data and analytics to make the decision making. In many corporations, what we have seen so far is that decisions were being made in many cases with a certain level of artistry, to say something, well, relying very heavily on the professionalism, on the gut feeling, on the view of certain professionals. What we see is that this keeps on being relevant because business acumen, having that extra element is needed, but right now many companies are much more investing in taking those decisions based on data, based on modeling, because the technology is there, the data is available, the ability to program algorithms from very simple to very complex is there. The magic is on how you interpret that information and how CFOs with this information help companies to channel and bring the focus across all the portfolio of potential capital allocation opportunities. That's one element. And another element that we are seeing is as we evolve, many companies are facing questions on where to invest that are more new, more creative. New businesses that they might not be so familiar with the digitalization. Also comes new ways of working, networking with competitors. We have seen it in the pharma industry during the pandemic. Novartis and Pfizer collaborating for the design and the production of the vaccine. Prior to the pandemic, this was just unthinkable. And this forces to think differently on how you weigh your capital allocation, which makes sense or not. That's just to bring one example of new ways of doing business that bring new capital allocation strategies. Of course, everybody is today talking about ESG, right? And what are brown versus green investments. And there is quite big focus. I've been talking to CFOs across various industries about the green CFO. What does it mean to be really an ESG and green CFO and foster those decisions in the company? And other kind of investments that do not follow the typical parameters. If we go into, for example, IT space, the massive migration into cloud requires different ways of creating the business case to decide whether it makes sense or not. How you follow up, you monitor whether you stay true to that business decision also follows different ways of measuring. So these are the two things that I think that as of today, CFOs are focusing quite a lot.
Absolutely, and I'm not sure, David, if you're on mute, but I would love to send this over to you as well.
I mean, what's interesting is, you know, we look at working capital, cash flow, and traditional tools, and this is the subject where I hope to excite the audience by posing some things to them to think about some of the lessons I think we've learned, but we probably didn't realize we learned them. But traditionally, you know, when we look at levers to improve our cash flow and our working capital, you know, there's traditional levers you'd look at: your inventory management, your day sales outstanding, your day payables outstanding. And these are the traditional levers that every CFO would look at to improve their financial health. Yeah. And to give you an idea, in the credit crunch, I was involved with the Bank of England because there was lack of liquidity in the market. So the Bank of England got involved to improve liquidity for suppliers. Otherwise, the supply chain would have stopped. That was the effect the credit crunch had in the day-to-day running of businesses that got the Bank of England's attention. But the silent side, I think, which just happened over the pandemic, and I hope that people join me in the journey because it's just my view. But you had a shock and you didn't realize you got a shock, but your shock was payroll because suddenly the governments closed your business and there was a stark reality that payroll was going to kill you. And that was why the governments intervened and created furlough and the likes of that. But what that taught me is there's a lesson that most businesses aren't prepared for a shock and a disruption in their business when it comes to payroll. In fact, we often go to blunt instruments, and the blunt instruments we go to is we reduce the workforce. But that's got huge costs because when you pick back up, you've got to rehire them, there's recruitment costs, there's training costs, and actually, you know, so what Hi's been working on is this whole basis that payroll itself has to move to the modern world to be able to allow its clients to deal with these shocks and become far more flexible and allow for you to, for the first time ever, to finance your payroll obligations because you may go through a trading period where you just need the workforce financed and you'll be okay next month, next quarter. And so what we've been working on is this whole concept that payroll has to adapt to the modern world because right now it's in the dinosaur world. It absolutely had no relevance when we came out of pandemic. It didn't play its role. In fact, it sat there requesting money every month. And that's not helpful for the employer, nor, as we say, is it helpful for the employees because they too have cash flow requirements. So really, you know, there's a new lever that Hi's been working on for the world of corporates to say, isn't it time we addressed payroll itself and turn payroll into a natural lever to help the business that doesn't require blunt instruments, that retains talent, that looks after the workforce, but at the same time allows the employer some degree of flexibility in the area of working capital and finance. And that is the disruption and the innovation that I hope your audience start to understand, because we went through this silent effect, which is actually quite real when you look at it, and it's quite shocking when we look at it, and we need to address it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really great points there. I would love for you to kind of expand on, you mentioned the outdated systems, but how can businesses ensure that they're allocating the right capital and where that goes?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the outdated system is payroll is a function of process rather than a function of finance. And actually, it's the area that consumes pretty much most of your working capital. So wouldn't it be better for every business if payroll became a function of finance that adapted itself to suit the trading requirements and the finance requirements of retaining a workforce rather than reducing a workforce because we have a momentary event? And wouldn't it be better if payroll gave your employees the ability to be paid as and when they need, rather than when we dictate they should get the money? So it's really about the evolution of payroll to really come into the modern world like we've done with everything else and play its role for once. I mean, you know, so the way I look at it, isn't it weird that I can see what I spend in the bank before I've even left the shop, but I have no idea how much wages you owe me? That's how archaic payroll is, right? So the number one reason that a lot of people come to work is invisible to them. And it's about really bringing that digitization to the modern world and saying, but surely there's a better role for payroll to play, a far more advanced role in the retention of the workforce and the health of the employer. So that's the area that Hi's challenging. And that's the area that we're pioneering with our friends at NTT Data, FTI Consulting, is really we've recognized that payroll is a legacy and it really needs an upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to open this topic up to our panelists. Alan, would you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, sure. I think, David, you raise a good point here, because payroll hasn't been made a competitive instrument yet by many organizations, right? It's still very much a process instrument, and it can be turned. So the question today, especially now with pandemic and what's going on in around the world in Ukraine, enterprise need to be more agile. So enterprise agility now is absolutely key, so that enterprises can deal with whatever's been thrown at them. And the question is, are you agile in every part of your enterprise? And are you making sure that every part of your enterprise can react in a way it needs to be? So using payroll, and I was going to use the word competitive weapon, but I don't think that's very appropriate now. Using the word as a competitive tool to win the war, to win talent, and to give flexibility and control to employees, and to be able to then use your capital efficiently, has to be something that will contribute to your what I call agility index as an enterprise.
If I could add and build on that, and I would like to link that to one of the points I've mentioned, right? In the current agenda of every CFO, which is ESG agenda, and how efficiently or effectively we contribute to the corporate agenda in that sense. Well, there is one element of the SDG agenda, which is about decent work and economic growth. What's decent work? I think decent work is much about what we have talked before about the employee at the center, what's important for them, why they want to work with us, what's the purpose, and what are their needs. And also their needs not only in career development, but also on how they are rewarded, with which flexibility, the flexibility that they need to cope with their real needs. I think that's also, and it's a very practical angle. Sometimes in this agenda, we thought in very big things that might not be down or concrete in actions. That's a very concrete lever that can be actioned by CFOs.
Absolutely. And Alvin, you mentioned, having business agility. I would love for you to also expand on that point and just kind of talk about the tools that businesses need to kind of, for efficient liquidity management, but also, to kind of stay up to speed. Alvin, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. So absolutely. So we're in the midst of what I call the fourth wave of value creation for enterprise value creation. So the first was the PC, the second was the internet, the third was mobility, and now it's digital and data. And maybe the fifth might be the use of AI in the enterprise. Yeah. But right in this wave, people are saying, how can I transform digitally? Like Belen said, how can I use data more effectively? How can I get more insight, right? How can I become more competitive? But another way to look at digital transformation is, especially in the times we find ourselves right now, post-pandemic and an uncertain future, is agility. And so, if you scratch the word digital transformation, you could just replace it with enterprise agility, the ability to be able to adapt, react, and quickly to every aspect of what's facing you. And if you look at so as CFOs, right, head of finance, working capital has to be key. AP, AR, pretty established, pretty grounded in terms of what's been happening over the last couple of years and the use of digital and data to enable those sort of functions to be optimized and efficient. But payroll hasn't. So I think payroll's the last, let's say, untapped opportunity for companies to really look at, what kind of key metrics can you drive if you improved your working capital efficiency. And that's the reason why we're excited, because we've looked at companies who who use AP and AR but not payroll. And then we've looked at companies that use AP and AR and payroll. And there is a clear bottom line impact to a number of financial ratios that should make any CFO or head of finance delighted. Yeah. Now, the byproduct of that is giving the employee control. So to me, right, if you look at the finance function, how agile, the couple of questions you could ask yourself, how agile am I? How can I react to, what's thrown at me? What can I do in every single a function of finance, and how can I make it more efficient, right? The underlying domains of capability you use are digital tools, digital platforms, and insight from data. Whether you could use data to predict where you're going, or you can use data to give you more insight to drive more efficiency and productivity. So yeah, I think I'm all for looking for new areas of value creation. And that's why, when I was asked to join the panel, I said, yeah, because I think this is untapped. Yeah, this is a new area of value creation that everyone should be really thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and David Brown, would you want to add to that on some of the tools that Alan mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, Alwyn's got an amazing point. So David and I, we met with a large client who has 160,000 employees. So, and just to put life in perspective, that's almost the same size as David's company, who have 140,000 employees. But what was fascinating is to hear the head of finance and the head of payroll explain that they estimate the cost of processing one timesheet is between $5 to $150 per employee. Now, just to reiterate, they have 160,000 people. So imagine the cost of that payslip when you've got 160,000 with that as the average cost. Secondly, when you look at the average payroll, when they close the doors to when they run payroll, I think the best in class I've seen is 7 days. Well, all of that points to huge inefficiencies and lack of digital transformation. And to put life into perspective, to process a payment is about 5 cents. So I've got 5 cents to process a payment, but I've got minimum of $5 to $150 to process a payslip. There's something fundamentally wrong here, right? And there's huge operational efficiencies by actually looking at it. And I find it fascinating that I can track a delivery driver real time for free today. I know when he's in the restaurant. I know when he's going to arrive in my house. Now, I'd actually say that's modern timekeeping, free of charge. But then people will go and install £5 million worth of time and attendance. So there's a new world out there digitally. I can tap in and tap out with Oyster. That's timekeeping. It's telling me what station I arrived. It was off peak. What was the fare journey? And what was... So there's a whole array of new digital transformation tools out there that have actually been tried and tested to really lower the cost, which is an operational lifetime benefit that the employer gets. But naturally, there's a fear because it involves payroll, because everybody's scared of payroll because they're like, don't get it wrong because that'll upset my employees. But I think the times came to say, but we've not touched payroll for 30 years, which is why it's $5 to $150. Isn't it time we revisited this and brought in a way of making that 5 cents? Not that I think you can get it to 5 cents anytime soon, but the cost of payroll is far excessive to any other back office function I've seen in any organization. And to give you an idea, I was involved in the company that invented e-procurement, which was this idea that you could reduce the cost of buyer and supplier by digitizing it. That's now standard practice globally, and it has significantly reduced the cost of processing a purchase order and reduced the cost of paying suppliers. I'm not so sure we've done the same for payroll. The more I look at it, the more excited I get that it is an area that is ripe for digitization, and that will improve the life of both the employee and the employer. So I'm urging the audience to really think about that area, because that's an area that we have specific interest in.
Just to add, David, Priscilla asked a question, can you expand on how we bring payroll to the modern world here? So here's something you could do like tomorrow, and you don't need any consulting help. You can just do it internally. You can get all of the people, all of the stakeholders involved in payroll into a room, into a workshop. On a whiteboard, you can map out the entire value chain for payroll, step by step, from the time an employee joins to the time they get onboarded, to the time you need to free up money, to the time you decide to pay them, to the time they get paid, and repeats. Yeah. And for each point in there, you could create, what is the pain? What is the pain point of each of that step? Visibility, transparency, getting paid when I want, the amount of money that I need to fund my payroll, how much is that costing the company? How do I finance that money? You could just and you should have roughly about 20 to 30 pain points, right? On average, having done this a couple of times now. And for each pain point, just ask yourself a simple question. If I eliminate that pain, what is the moment of value? For the employee, for yourselves as head of finance or leaders of finance, for other stakeholders in the company that have to support and provide it, for how much money you're actually spending on third-party providers. What is the moment of value if you eliminate that point? Now, for every, for 20 or 30 pain points, you should have 20 or 30 moments of value. At the end of the workshop, you should be able to stand back from that whiteboard and say, how do I bring payroll to the modern world? Well, that's, eliminate the pain points, eliminate the inefficiencies, give employees control, yeah? So that would be my suggestion. And you can do it internally. It's called, reimagining payroll would be a good way to start, right? Or title of that workshop, yeah.
And if I can, when we start engaging, is because what we are having were conversations about companies struggling to pay their employees. So we started with, having conversations about how to help fund those companies to generate working capital that will allow them to maintain the employees that they want to maintain. But then there was another one that as soon as we went deep into the problem, we realized that by giving the control of the payrolls to the employees, we were helping them even with their finance, with their well-being, in a moment, where people was more aware than ever that this would happen, okay? So we are piloting that, and I can tell you the results are very good. I think it's a good conversation that can be had with all the CFOs. And also because it helps, the financial area to step on other people's areas, to show that, there is the social part of what we do that is at the end to make sure that people who work with our companies have everything they need to be happy on it. And at this moment in time, this is really important. Okay.
Absolutely. And just a quick one before I am seeing a few questions come through, and just a reminder to our audience to continue asking the questions. We will get to them in about 5 minutes or so. But before we do, I just want to touch upon a point made by you, Belen. You mentioned different investment tools such as ESGs and the sustainability part of it. But I'd love to ask, kind of from your perspective, changing the capital allocation in your business, and how has that helped you drive a competitive edge? What's worked and what hasn't worked, I guess. Yeah, it'd be really great to hear.
You're on mute, Belen.
Sorry, just following the guideline, and I forget. Sorry. What we have been seeing in that respect is that the key important question is which are the criteria that we are bringing into decision making. And the pandemic has helped us a lot to revisit the typical criteria in every company where we have to put the money and where is our focus. We are working with a big transportation company, a global company. Probably everyone in the audience receives parcels and packages at home from that company. What they are doing globally in that aspect is they have a benchmark of capital allocation, a global benchmark of capital allocation. Whatever investment, whatever capital decision that they make, they create clusters, types of investments that they cover certain criteria, and they are compared across them. What does it allow? Really to make sure that the resources are focused across the globe where it makes more sense for the strategy or where they are more needed in terms of time. What they do is they use an analytical baseline to run the models and suggest to the controllers what they should do and how this competes, and even giving them transparency in the committee, in the weekly committee where allocation is decided, how they are ranked and compete with others, so that they can streamline the reasons why they want to present that. So this is bringing much more transparency where we are allocating the money, why we are focusing on what we are focused. And now in big volatility times, what we see is that a lot of the investment goes into securing the supply chain. Yes, it's one area that where everybody's focusing, but not only. So it's also helping to demystify. Oh no! All the money goes there because it's the high topic, it's the hot topic. No, not compulsory. That's what how we see the leaders in capital allocation and being smart on that topic evolving.
Yeah, but then sort of going a little further on the ESG agenda. So one of the things that we actually reviewed was could payroll itself become a tool for the green agenda? Could it actually help organizations get part of the way to carbon zero? Because that's an area that people will struggle with, and over time, if you've not resolved your carbon footprint, you're just going to be taxed anyway. So it will become a real issue. And what we found out is that if you're financing in general, and you take the financing from what's called a green loan book, you will get a discount. So rather than taking a discount, we kind of looked at it and said that could play a role in reducing your carbon footprint. And instead of a discount, it goes to your carbon offset. And initial modelling kind of told us that payroll could play a significant role in reducing anyone's carbon footprint by roughly 15%, right? Just in the financing of payroll itself. That would apply to a lot of financing tools that are available to most CFOs that are here today. Is if you move your loan book to a green loan book, you could use that saving to basically deal with your carbon footprint. So it's an area that we've looked at, and we've actually got support from the US Chamber of Commerce to actually explore that even further for SMEs. It's early days, but we do think that payroll could play a role there as well as the ESG. We talk about the ESG, and the financial well-being of every one of your employees and the social impact that creates should be on every CFO's agenda anyway, because financial freedom, financial resilience, as David says, helping them with their budgeting, and some of them will have debt, helping them with debt counselling, etc., etc. I mean, that has huge productivity boosts for an employer and massive benefits in terms of ESG, which is why we're a B corporation ourselves, because we believe that the impact and the financial well-being of employees improves the productivity that the employer enjoys. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. Some really great points from you all, from our expert panelists. I feel that we can probably continue this conversation for a lot longer than our allocated hour. But we will now jump into these questions. So we have one from Kilford that says, how does payroll flexibility work in credit assessments for financing IR35 0 hours?
I think I'll take that one if you don't mind. I mean, so it's interesting. So most of our efforts, both with our lawyers, Slaughter and May, and with our financiers have actually been looking at the employee and the employees in particular because of the employment contracts, employment law, etc. You know, where I have an IR35, and I'm going to take this as an assumption that it's a consultant, that's more an invoice-related financing matter, and there's a huge market for invoice financing. We've particularly focused on employee financing because there's no market for employee financing. So the employees are actually at a disadvantage to every supplier in the organization because they have no cash flow access whatsoever. So that had became really our focus of this Kilford. And so we provide credit in financing on an employee basis. We haven't done it for consultants. In terms of 0 hours, as long as they're on payroll, where more often than not they are, they still qualify for financing in the high system.
Yep, absolutely. And we have another question from Catherine. How does the Hi55 payroll financing work, and what is the cost?
So like most organizations, you know, you'll either have an internal payroll function and you'll have an outsourced payroll function, but you'll definitely have a payroll function. And we've been working with the leading providers of the platforms that provide that function, be it SAP, be it Sage, et cetera, to really allow minimum disruption by simply enabling the current payroll infrastructure. The reason we did that is because that's the fastest way to create the win. However, it doesn't mean you've done a digital transformation. It just simply means you've enabled the financial well-being and the financial resilience of your organization, but there is still a journey I encourage every CFO to consider after that, which is how do I run my operations cheaper, quicker, more visible? And that's a transformation journey to digital. So we can enable the organization rapidly, minimum disruption, minimum change. However, I urge you to understand that doesn't mean you've done a digital transformation. It just means we have created the financial layer across your organization. The second question is, what does it cost? That's a $1 million question. It's really quite simple. It depends on how many employees we're servicing. The lower the employees, the higher the cost. The higher the employees, the lower the cost, because there's economies of scale. So to give you an example, our largest employer, you know, and that we're talking to has 600,000 employees. They'll pay roughly £1 per employee for the service. Our smallest employer has 20 employees and they'll pay close to £20 for that service. So it depends, but that £20 included payroll, included running the payroll. So it really depends. And I'm not trying to avoid the question. It depends on the configuration you asked for. So you could ask me to outsource your payroll, provide you the platform, provide you the financing, yeah, and that's the full suite product. Well, that's the most expensive product. To simply, I just want to do employee well-being, and that's the cheapest product. So it depends what we're asked for, and if anybody wants to have that conversation with us, we'll tell you what it costs. I just don't know the exact question that's been asked because there's so many variances. As in, you may want to keep your internal payroll staff, you may want to outsource them. So that's why I can't give a straight answer to this. However, what I can say is this is the cheapest finance available in the market because we've got the financial markets to accept that payroll is an asset they want to finance. And that took 1.5 years to convince the city that they are prepared to put billions of capital at work to finance payroll. And trust me, that was where we spent most of our time, which was convincing the major banks, the major financial institutions that payroll is the safest asset you can finance in any organization.
Thank you, David. Just to close off our conversation, I have a question this will be to all of our panelists. We touched upon digital transformation quite briefly, but in each of your opinions, what would you say has been the biggest obstacle to tech implementation? How did you overcome it? And what would you say is the most important piece of technology in your stack? Belen, we can start with you.
Just one. Just one to summarize. I think where I see people struggling more, organizations and CFOs, is it's not so much on the technology, it's on the use of the technology, on really maximizing, helping your team to get the most out of it. In particular, the analytical bits, the analytics on the payroll, analytics on capital allocation. Many professionals are very much used to collect information, to report, but not to really make the challenge the hypothesis to answer the right questions. I think that's the biggest challenge. What we have seen is that the finance practitioners are very sensible to proper coaching and accompanying them to move into the journey. But it's not just on their own or leaving them alone. With proper transformation, they can become the digital finance function of the future, but not just by giving them a date and leaving them alone.
Alwyn?
You're mute, Alvin.
Sorry about that. I'd summarize it in 3 themes. Yeah, the first theme is, as custodians of finance, you have a fantastic opportunity right now to reimagine finance, every aspect of it, using digital and data. Right, so that's the first theme. And why would you do that? Because you can create enterprise agility for your company. You can make sure that finance is agile. Every aspect of finance is agile to cope with whatever comes down the road in this period of uncertainty post-pandemic. So that's the second theme. And the third theme is, by doing those 2 things, you will be able to give your employees flexibility and control. That'll be the third theme. Flexibility and control. The more decisions they can make for themselves that will help you support and grow your company, the happier they will feel, and the more loyal they will be, and more engaged they will be. So 3 themes: reimagine finance, create enterprise agility, and give your employees flexibility and control.
Wonderful. David Costa, continue.
Well, for me, I think you have mentioned already part of what I wanted to say. I would say that genuinely focus on engaging with your colleagues. So understanding the role that you as CFO can play to make sure that the company is a place where people want to work. For me, the technology was not the problem. To work from home, we were able to do it in one day. The main problem was the challenge to separate your personal life and your work. I think that from the CFO area, I think you have a very good perspective of everything that is needed. And I think now, with what we are discussing, you have tools to genuinely impact on the life of these people. So I will concentrate on how you can help from your role to make things that are meaningful, to become, is to be the bosses of the money of the company, to be the leaders that guide, how to invest the money that you have. And I think, this new way of doing payroll and funding, I think it's a good way. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And David Brown, any closing remarks from you?
Yes, and I would like to thank everyone for listening. I'd like to thank David, Belen, and Alwyn for their participation. And I think I'm going to leave you with a question, which is, the question would be, it's time for you to think about the banking challenge, which is, if I can see what I spend as I spend it, when will your employees be able to see real time what they're earning as they earn it? And I want a CFO to think about that as a challenge. Why? Because if you want ultimate employee, retention, well-being, etc., they should be able to see what they're earning on a real-time basis. And I want you to think about how you can deliver that to your workforce, because that's the challenge that we're talking about: the digital journey, the freedom of pay, employee well-being, and financial resilience of the employer. And I'd like every CFO just to think, could you do that today? Because I don't think you can.
yeah, a nice closing remark and thought to end our discussion with there. Well, thank you so much to our expert panelists. You've all been brilliant, and thank you for the questions from our audience. Fortunately, that is all we have time for today. So once again, thank you, David, both Davids, Alwyn, Belen, and of course to our audience for listening. That's all from us, and until next time, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.